Hello, good evening. I'm just getting on to uh, going live on Instagram as well. Yay! There we go. There we go. It's all happening. Um, I do apologise for being a little bit in disarray this evening. I've just come back from a tour of the West Country where I was visiting various bookshops, including the fabulous Hungerford bookshop and also Bert's Books in Swindon, both of which were deeply inspiring and marvellous. And I gave out fiction prescriptions to people who needed bibliotherapy and helped people to find books to read. Oh, just looking at my makeup, looking a little bit interesting. Um, I do apologise for being a little bit out of sorts. I'm wearing my Christmas tree dress, and today I'm going to be talking about my books of the year 2022. And I would love to know what your favourite books of this year are. So do comment on Instagram and Facebook. You can also tweet me and tell me what your favourite books of this year were. I've just noticed the unsightly plastic box behind me, which I'm going to move because that really doesn't add to the joy of this live session. But I have just been rushing around the countryside telling people about fiction prescriptions, which of course could be one of my books of the year as it's only just come out. And this is a box full of fiction prescriptions for all of life's moments when you need such things. So it has emotional scenarios such as depression, worry, anxiety, doubt, but also happiness, euphoria. And then it also has life situations such as birth, teenage years, coming of age, parenthood, falling in love, being single, aging, losing a loved one, and so on. And with all of these, you can find a cure for such a situation in the form of a novel. So it's a means to find the right book to read at the right time in your life. So that's fiction prescriptions. And I've just been rushing around the countryside telling people about that. Been to Colchester, Hungerford, and Swindon in the last few days, which has been joyous, going to various independent bookshops. And while I was on those travels, the various bookshop owners and workers were telling me about their favourite books of the year, which has also been hugely illuminating. And I'm going to tell you about them as well if we have time. And I do know it's going to be difficult to get through all the brilliant books that have been coming out this year. I think it's been a really great year for books. I don't know about you, but I'm going to start by telling you about Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. And anyone that's been in a bookshop this year will have certainly noticed Lessons in Chemistry. Just fiddling a little bit with my camera to make it. Oh, reconnecting. There we are. That's better. Um, so anyone in a bookshop will have seen Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus, which is a really great, lovely book, which is set in the 1960s for anyone that hasn't read it or seen it in the bookshelves. And it's all about a woman, Elizabeth Zott, who is a chemist and a scientist, and she encounters terrible sexism and is forced to leave her job where she works in a lab and become this is not giving things away because it's all you find out about it quite early on. She becomes a TV chef and her method of cooking is all about using chemistry for cooking, and it's actually hilarious, very dry humor, very uplifting and heartwarming, but it does also have some really sad moments. There's a lot of quite hard hitting things going on as well. So it's not all by any means light and fluffy, but it is one of those books which I think practically everyone loves. And Elizabeth Zott is such a fantastic character. There's also a really wonderful dog in the book called 630, who is surely one of the best dogs ever in literature. You completely fall in love with this dog, believe me. And that has been one of my favourite books of the year. That is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. And it's been flying off the bookshelves. I think everyone that I've seen in this last few days whirling around independent bookshops has agreed that it's a really great read, and everyone seems to love it. Boys, men and women, boys and girls. I think there's something about going back to that period of the 1960s, which is really fun. And also, you just totally root for Bonnie, who becomes a single mother without giving too much away. And she is just trying to survive as a single mother, doing the best she can. But it does just have this really great sense of humour about it. So that's a big recommend. Great present. Then another one that has been one of my favourite books to recommend this year is Still Life by Sarah Winman, which is seemingly universally recognised as being one of the best books of this year. So many people I've met have loved it, been reading it and giving it to all their friends. When I was in Colchester at the Red Lion Bookshop the other day, which is a fantastic bookshop for anybody that lives in Suffolk, the one of the people in that shop was saying that she'd given it, one of the people that came to me as a bibliotherapy client said that she'd literally given it to 10 other people. Similarly, when I was in Alfriston at Much Ado Bookshop, I met another lady in her 70s who had adored this book and given it to everyone that she knows. And this is a book that somehow has a well nigh totally universal appeal. And why is that? I think it's because it completely celebrates friendship, and it celebrates the bonds of family, where the family is not necessarily your obvious family. It's your logical family, as Armistead Maupin says. And it is the story of a man called Ulysses, and there's another character in the book called Evelyn, who meet briefly at the beginning of the book, which is in 1944 in Italy. And the young British soldier Ulysses, great name, has been making globes before he became a soldier. He makes globes out of paper mache. And he meets art historian Evelyn Skinner, who's a woman in her 60s who's come to Italy to rescue works of art caught up in the war. And thus begins a lifelong friendship. But that's just kind of the framing device of the book. We also have a parrot who is constantly making rather witty remarks, mostly remarks taken from Shakespeare plays. And we also have um, the daughter of Ulysses, not wanting to give too much away to everyone, who is a really fantastic character. And we go through the flood of Florence, which happened in the 1960s. That was a real event where there was a huge flood that rose up, the waters of Florence rose up several meters, and many works of art were under terrible threat and some were destroyed. But there's a really great chapter where we see these works of art being rescued, and Ulysses wades through the flood with his globe that he's rescued as well. It's a fantastic read and really good Christmas present. I can pretty much guarantee that anyone you give it to will love it. That's Still Life by Sarah Winman. Now, another book which came across as a total favourite of this year, and it is also a total favourite of mine, is the wonderful and brilliant Patrick Gale's Mother's Boy. Now, this book was the favourite of the fantastic owner of Bert's Bookshop in Swindon. He has a huge display of Patrick Gale's book for everyone to see because it's his book of the year. And it's absolutely in my top few books of the year because it's such a great read. It's quite a gentle read in a way. It's Patrick's 17th novel, and it's his first fully historical novel since A Place Called Winter, which is also an absolute favourite of mine. And it's based around the known facts of the boyhood and youth of the great Cornish poet Charles Causley, who is a sadly little known poet these days, except beloved of, or maybe slightly marred by the fact that he's in the GCSE curriculum. But actually, all the GCSE students I know who've been studying Eden Rock by Charles Causley have absolutely loved that poem. It's been probably their favourite of the poems in the GCSE selection. And Patrick Gale has always been really interested in Charles Causley, the real poet, and he has he went into great research and hung out in Launceston. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Launceston, in Cornwall, which is where Charles Causley grew up. And he found out all about his life. And he then conjectured about what was really happening in Charles Causley's inner life. And he makes his life into an absolutely gripping, brilliant story, which is about how he was gay, about how he fell in love while he was in the army, and about how he became a poet. And it's just got these absolutely fantastic scenes on the beach in Cornwall, from where Charles Causley actually did go in order to go and have picnics, etc., from school. And we completely follow in his footsteps, and we are utterly believing that we are there. It's incredibly vivid, and I really think Patrick has captured this era with incredible vividness, the sights, the smells, the tastes, and he also captures that achingly painful love of a repressed gay boy, then man, at the time. And it's a really beautiful read, which everyone I know that's read it has absolutely loved it. Another fantastic gift, I would say, to anyone in your family. But it's also a really interesting exploration of mother-son relationship, because they have this very understated but very beautiful and very profound love for each other, the mother and son. And we really get an insight into Charles Causley's mother's feelings as well. So, all in all, it's a completely irresistible read. Then, knowing that I've got to move quickly through this list of amazing books tonight, Without Warning and Only Sometimes by Kit de Waal. This is a memoir of Kit de Waal's unpredictable childhood. And this is an absolutely fantastic read, which is very funny and also deeply moving and at times really sad. So Kit de Waal grew up in a household of opposites and extremes. Her haphazard mother rarely cooked. They were not allowed to celebrate Christmas and birthdays because her mother was a Jehovah's Witness. Her mother worked as a cleaner, nurse, and childminder, sometimes all at the same time, and she believed that the world would end in 1975. And Kit de Waal and her siblings were all brought up in this very strange, chaotic household. Um, and her father was a bus driver, and he was from the Caribbean, and he was cooking elaborate and beautiful meals on a whim, but very unpredictably. Everything was unpredictable in their life. And Kit Duvall was caught between three worlds of the Irish, Caribbean, and British worlds in the 1960s Birmingham. And they had a really hard time when they were basically growing up in poverty and having this very erratic mother who forced them to go and sit in the Jehovah's Witness meetings at enormous length until the time when Kit left the family age 17 and broke away from the religion. And that's when it gets particularly interesting to me as a bibliotherapist, because we then have this really interesting section in which Kit is saved by books, literally, because she has totally gone off the rails. She's living in a bedsit, living a really hand to mouth existence, not really having any ambition or purpose in life, not really doing any work. And then she starts reading. She does get a job as a secretary, and she is so conscious that she's become something of an addict to, I think she was smoking cannabis, and maybe it was alcohol, but I think it was mostly smoking weed, and she sort of couldn't get through the day without it. So then she started reading books. So she asked advice from the guy that she was working for as a secretary. He gave her his top 10 books, which is a really great classic list of books, but very masculine. And you'll have to read it to find the books that she mentioned. There she is in all her glory. And she started reading, and her life began to be saved by books. And that was in her late teens, early 20s, I believe. And then she slowly was enabled to become the amazing writer that she now is. And lots of you will know her from having written My Name is Leon, and for having got together the anthology Common People. And she's a fantastic proponent of working class writers. Kit Duvall, fantastic writer. And this is her memoir. Absolutely brilliant. Definitely one to read. Now, on a different topic, this is all dotting around a lot. I'm giving you my top probably 12 books of the year. A very different read is The Bewitching by Jill Dawson. Now, this is a great book for people that enjoy historical fiction. It is based around a real story, and it is depressing because we know how the story ends, because the threads of the true story, which this is based on, are based on the War Boys witch trials in Huntingdonshire, which took place after allegations were made in 1589 by Jane, the 9-year-old daughter of local squire Robert Throckmorton, who'd been having fits and trances. She accused 76-year-old wise woman Alice Samuel of bewitching her, and was supported by her four. So I don't think she was 76. I think that's actually a mistake. Sorry, I think she's in her 50s. She accused this wise woman, Alice Samuel, of bewitching her, and was then supported by her sisters and servants. And it's just agonizing to watch, because we know that Alice is simply a woman getting on with her business who knows how to heal people with herbs. But we then witness all this terrible superstition and awful chauvinism, basically, against the women that they just don't understand and are frankly rather terrified of. And we just don't get it why this 9-year-old girl is accusing the poor, innocent older woman, Alice. And we go through all the agonies of the accusations, denials, and what's going on in the households at the time. And it's a really gripping read, even though you know what's going to happen at the end. And it really brings it very vividly to life. And it does have this rather fantastic cover with the toad. There's lots of hilarious moments where the witch is being accused of being in league with a chicken, a dun chicken, and the chicken is supposedly taking evil curses to different people around the village. And it's just amazing to think what people believed in those times. It's all quite horrifying. And when you watch a TV series like Traitor, it rather makes you think of the witch trials as well. So that's a really great read, and could be a good Christmas present for the people who love a good historical fiction and a good tale of unfair injustice. Then moving on, one of my other great favourite books of the year is Natalie Haynes's Stone Blind. And look at this beautiful cover. So I have talked a lot about A Thousand Ships, which is one of my favourite books, which was written a couple of years ago. And since A Thousand Ships, Natalie has also published Pandora's Jar, which is another really lovely book. But that's about the stories of Pandora. This one is a modern fictionalized story of Medusa. Obviously, Medusa is mythological anyway, but it's kind of a modern take in a way on what really happened to Medusa, what went on in her head and on her head, how she was cursed to have serpents on her head and why, and what happened afterwards. And you fully enter into this story. I found it a really brilliant read. I absolutely loved it. It's totally readable and completely gets you into the mindset of Medusa, and you completely sympathize with her. So Medusa is generally portrayed as an awful monster who everyone's terrified of, but in this version of the story, we really love Medusa, and she has two sisters who she loves, who are Gorgons and who probably would be terrifying and really ugly for most people. But in this version of the story, we understand their sibling love and the ways that the Gorgons try to look after Medusa, their sister, and how Perseus comes into their life and rather ruins things for everyone. But it's a really funny, fascinating, gripping reimagining of the Medusa story. So this is an excellent read, one of my complete faves of the year. Definitely really good Christmas present as well. So that's Stone Blind by Natalie Haynes, which I fully recommend to everyone. And by the way, while I'm here, do send me a comment and tell me which are your favourite books. Christina, thanks for your comment saying that she absolutely loved Still Life and learned so much about the Florence flood that she didn't know. Thank you for that. I'm glad that you loved it as much as I did. So that was Still Life. Now, I just wanted to mention also, while thinking about Stone Blind, a reimagining of Medusa. Another one, just to mention in passing, is Warrior Queens by Kate Moss, which is a really fantastic description of all the amazing women who were important in the history of the world in various ways and were overlooked. So that's Warrior Queens, which I don't have to hand to show you, but that's one must mention, I feel, as a great book that was published this year, which is all about the overlooked women in history. So thinking about a book like Stone Blind, which is all about Medusa, and indeed The Bewitching by Jill Dawson, which is all about a poor woman accused of witchcraft when she was actually an ordinary woman who had had various terrible things happening to her in her life. Warrior Queens is a really great book to be aware of if you haven't seen it, because that's a really good book to give people or to read to yourself to discover all those overlooked women of history. Then, so many books to mention. Unraveller by Frances Hardinge. Just having a look if I can see it on my bookshelf with any ease. I'm not sure if it's going to come to hand. It's got a very beautiful cover, but I'm afraid I couldn't find it in my rushing around today. But shows the slight chaos that I'm in at the moment. Unraveller by Frances Hardinge is a young adult novel, but it's a one that everyone should read, like so many great young adult novels. And actually, her book, The Lie Tree, if you don't know it, is another superb novel which everyone should read, not just teenagers. So, Unraveller is a really lovely, interesting, bizarre, imaginative story where anyone in this slightly fantasy world, which is very like our world, but just a tiny bit different, can create a life destroying curse, which can come in all kinds of forms. So it can be a curse that maybe turns you into a ship, or it might be a curse that turns you into a piano, or it might be a curse that turns you into a fish. So people have the power, if they really hate someone or if they bear some terrible grudge, to do absolutely awful things to you in a long-term physical way. And if you're cursed to become a fish, you might then be eaten by your own child or spouse. So it's actually a horrifying, brilliant, and um, awful idea. And there's only one person in this world who has the power to unravel curses, hence the name Unraveller. And this person is Kellen, a boy who doesn't fully understand his talent, but helps people who have been maliciously transformed um, to unravel their own curses, or he will unravel them for them. And one of those people that he helps is Nettle, a girl who has been recovered from her entrapment, in which she was in bird form along with her siblings. And Kellen, who is able to unravel curses, has also been cursed. And if he can't unravel his own curse, then everyone around him could unravel in their own ways. So it's a book that works on many different levels of unraveling, and it's beautifully written, as with all Frances Hardinge novels. It takes you on lots of different um, slightly fantastical directions. There are little brothers in the book, which are spiders who scuttle around, or they're not exactly spiders, they're slightly different to spiders. And of course, they do weave webs. And one of the great things that I love about the book is that Kellen, the hero, has this unraveling ability, but he also accidentally unravels things. So wherever he goes, uh, everything around him, the cloth, the clothes of people, sometimes his own clothes, begin to unravel. So if he goes into an old house with tapestries, they will begin to unravel, and so on. So that's the amazing, wonderful world of Frances Hardinge. Love her books. Now, Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller. Just trying to find the book, and I don't think that one's going to come to hand either at this moment. But Unsettled Ground won many awards. It's Claire Fuller's, I think it's her fourth novel, slightly losing track. And she is an absolutely brilliant writer. Love Unsettled Ground. It's a book which is quite another quite kind of story. It's about two twins in their 50s whose mother dies at the very beginning of the book, and they live in the middle of nowhere in the 21st century in poverty. and their mother has always looked after them and done everything for them. So they don't have bank accounts. They're not part of our modern world. They don't have jobs. They don't know what to do with a check if they get given a check. So when their mother dies, they're left completely um, rootless and uprooted and unable to cope. And it turns out that the house that they're living in doesn't belong to them in the way that they thought it did. And they're suddenly homeless. And it's actually a really fascinating, tragic depiction of modern poverty, modern rural poverty, in a way that you don't often see in modern fiction. And it's very beautifully imagined and revealed. And although it's a sad topic, it's not a sad book. It's got lots of really beautiful moments in it, and I would thoroughly recommend it. And it leads me on to Paper Cup by Karen Campbell, which is another fantastic book that I loved this year, which is all about a homeless woman who goes on a bit of an odyssey herself. Um, she goes on a long journey in order to return the ring of a bride who had drunkenly lost her wedding ring on the night of her hen night. And our heroine accidentally acquires this ring. She's called Kelly, and she becomes determined to give back the ring to its rightful owner. Although at first she might have kept it, we never quite know. I mean, she doesn't know at the beginning if she really wants to give it back, because obviously she's homeless. It's a diamond ring, and it could mean that she could have some money. So we go with her on this odyssey in which she's attempting to return a ring to a bride. And it's very much a story again of modern poverty, which is why it's interesting to think about it in relation to Unsettled Ground, which is a very different kind of book. But Paper Cup is a book that really makes you think about being homeless, particularly in the cold, particularly now, and um, very much makes you want to help anyone homeless that you might meet. And it's all set in Scotland, or on the way back to Kelly's hometown, where and we gradually discover as we travel with her why she left and what's happened in her life since she left her hometown. And it is a really lovely, sad, beautiful, and ultimately positive story. So that's Paper Cup by Karen Campbell. Then I don't want to miss any out, but I know that there's a lot to fit in. So, one of my great favourites of this year is Mrs. Death, Mrs. Death by Selena Godden. Now, Selena Godden is a poet, and this is her first debut novel. And you very much can tell that she's a poet when you read the book, because it's written with such incredible use of language, repetition, and amazing linguistic skill. You can tell that she's reveling in every word and every phrase. And it is a book about death. So, in this novel, Mrs. Death has had enough. She's exhausted from spending eternity doing her job. And now she wants to unburden herself to someone. So she meets Mrs. Death meets Wolfe Williford, who's a troubled young writer who is herself well acquainted with Death but hasn't actually met Death in person. And Death, in Selena's depiction of the entity, is a black working class woman who shapeshifts and does her work invisibly and quite frequently wanders around London pushing a shopping trolley. Wolfe becomes Mrs. Death's scribe and starts writing her memoirs. So this is, in a way, the memoirs of Death herself. So we're treated to a history of death through the ages, but it's also particularly relevant to now because there's a lot about the Grenfell Tower tragedy in this book, and it's in some places the book is a bit of a rant, but it's a very beautifully written and fantastically eloquent rant, and it also has amazing flights of fantasy and some really beautiful songs in it as well. It's a really great read, which is actually oddly very uplifting, which you wouldn't particularly expect of a book all about death. On the same subject, another great favourite book of mine this year, which I have been prescribing to many people, is 12 Months and a Day by Louisa Young, which is another book about death. And I actually interviewed both Louisa and Selina together, which was a really fantastic evening at the House of St Barnabas. And I'm hoping to be doing some more events at House of St Barnabas next year when I put authors under the covers and talk to them all about their life in books. Great occasions, look out for them. House of St Barnabas, monthly events. And so this book, 12 Months and a Day, is a book about two ghosts and two lovers who are left behind by the ghosts. So they're perfectly ordinary people, both of them, and both of the couples are in their 30s or thereabouts when two of the lovers die. So Rasmus and Jay, Roisin and Nico are the couples whose lives are cut short by death. Jay and Nico don't even believe in ghosts, yet they seem to actually be ghosts when they suddenly realise that they're dead. And it's a really lovely, heartwarming tale, which is very funny, very humorous, very lovingly written, and very sad because it is full of grief. So, in a nutshell, two very deeply loved people die on roughly the same time. One of them dies of a heart attack. That's Nico, who's a musician. Is he a musician? No, he's a he works in accident and emergency, and Roisin. Sorry, I'm getting all the names muddled up now. Jay uh, dies of cancer. And anyway, the two ghosts are left behind and they start talking to each other in the afterlife. And it's just a really wonderful life and death love story. It's got a bit of an element of Truly Madly Deeply in it. It's very much a story of today. So the ghosts travel around England on public transport, sometimes on an aeroplane. One of the ghosts goes to Africa. They find ways of dealing with the fact that they are, in fact, dead. And they're mostly watching over their live loved ones and wondering how they can help the poor loved ones that they've left behind. And slowly we witness what happens to the ones that are left behind and how they try to move on in their lives. And it's just a really gorgeous depiction of life after death in both senses. So the lovers who are left behind have to live on, and it's what happens to them, and it's also what happens in the ghostly world. All in all, a really great, really thought provoking read that does make you think about death in a different way, as does Selina Godden's book, too. Um, so, which one next? Too many great books to talk about, too little time. As I'm on the subject, I will also mention this lovely memoir by Rob Delaney, A Heart That Works, which is a book that made me laugh, made me cry. It's all about Rob Delaney's poor little son, Henry, who died very tragically, of a brain tumour. And Rob Delaney, who is famous for his fantastic TV show Catastrophe, has written this really beautiful, incredibly funny memoir, but also incredibly sad memoir, all about the experience of losing his son. And it is absolutely brilliant. And it's a great book to read if you are bereaved yourself, because you fully enter into how he felt. It's full of anger at times, but it's also full of love and a lot of laughter too. Quite often when reading this, you're laughing and crying at the same time. I do seem to be talking about a lot of books relating to death, because another one that I must mention as another fantastic book of the year is The Seven Moons of Marley Almeida, which won the Booker Prize. And this, I'm sure lots of you will have read about, but it's a really fabulous read. It's written in the eyes of a man who has literally just died. He's a photographer, he's Sri Lankan, and he is basically talking about the brutalities of the Sri Lankan regime and trying to put the injustices that he witnessed in his life to rights in his death. And he's got 7 moons in which to do that. So that's 7 nights. Now, this is a really excellent read. It's one to keep going back to. It's actually surprisingly speedy as a read as well, even though it's quite a substantial book. And like 12 Months and a Day and Mrs. Death, Mrs. Death, these are our 3 great death books of this year. It gives you a totally different perspective on death, which is really interesting. And although it is sad and very eye-opening about Sri Lanka, and very much one to make you discover a lot more about Sri Lanka, it does also have a weirdly positive and upbeat trajectory. So it's another fantastic book about death, which leaves you feeling, in a way, oddly positive. So another great one, definitely to read, and one that I'd highly recommend. Young Mungo by Douglas Stewart. This is another great favourite of mine of this year, and it's from the Booker Prize winning author of Shuggie Bain, Douglas Stewart. It is his second novel. It's a vivid portrayal of working class life and a highly suspenseful story of the dangerous first love of 2 young men, Mungo and James. So it's an utterly gripping book. I found I was on the absolute edge of my seat. Couldn't really believe what the heck was happening in it. Really couldn't put it down. Had to stay up till the early hours to finish it. And it's quite brutal at times, it has to be said. One is witnessing with horror as Mungo is taken off to the Scottish countryside to kind of learn a lesson about being a man, which is all deeply sinister, with 2 older guys who take him on a camping slash fishing trip. And he's deeply inappropriately clad, wearing really ridiculous clothes, sleeping in a tent without any of the right blankets, sleeping bags, things to sleep upon. And it all goes from bad to worse. But it's an absolutely brilliant, gripping, shocking, excellent read, which is completely up there with all these fantastic books that I've been talking about. But I know there's more. I know there's more. And there's also ones that I haven't yet mentioned, which I need to come back to. So hold your horses. We've had Kit Duvall's memoir. We've had Unsettled Ground, Paper Cup. Oh, where's it gone? I know there's another one lurking. Unraveler. Oh, yes. When We Were Birds by Ayanna Lloyd Banwo, which is another deathly book. Sorry, guys, I don't know why there's so much death going on in the books this year. Do tell me of your own books which are not so deathly. But all these deathly books are actually incredibly positive and uplifting. So, When We Were Birds by Ayanna Lloyd Banwo is a fantastic, mesmerizing, mythic, timeless tale, debut novel by Trinidadian author Ayanna Lloyd Banwo, which is a love story and a ghost story set in the lush landscape and thriving back streets of modern day Trinidad, which is a place I used to live for 7 years. So I'm always particularly excited by Trinidadian literature. So it's about a man called Darwin who is a Rastafarian, and he's always promised his mum that he will never do anything, any kind of work to do with death, because that is against their religion. But he's down on his luck. He doesn't have any opportunity of another job. So he cuts off his dreadlocks and goes to work in a graveyard and becomes a gravedigger in the fictional city of Port Angeles. And then he meets a girl who's called Yajidi, whose mother is dying, and her mother's leaving behind a legacy, which is the power to talk to the dead. So both of these characters are fatally tied to the graveyard in different ways. And it's a really fascinating mythical tale rich with magic and wisdom, which is exuberant, incantatory in the way that Selena Godden's book is as well. There's an incantatory quality to both of those, which does weave an unforgettable story of loss and renewal. So, and that's another great read, which is When We Were Birds. It is another ghost story in a way. Well, it has ghosts in it, but it's very much the story of love and hope as well. So I just want to come to an end with your recommendations to me, because those are all my favourite books that I've been recommending to people over this year and discovering over the year and loving over the year. But books that I've been recommended, which I haven't yet had the joy of reading, are Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which is a book which the one of the shop workers in Colchester at the Red Lion bookshop recommended to me with utter passion and said that she's been giving it to absolutely everybody that she knows. It's by Gabrielle Zevin, and that's by all accounts an absolutely amazing read. And I'll just read you a little bit about it because it looks fantastic. I've been lusting after it today when I was in various bookshops, and clearly have to get a copy. If anyone wants to send me one, feel free. Christmas present from the author of The Beloved, The Storied Life of A.J. Fikri, comes a heartwarming tale of human connection, creativity, and collaboration as two children who meet in a hospital go on to pursue their dreams and identities through the production of video games. So, some people might be put off by the idea that this is a book about video games. And everyone I've spoken to says if you're not a video game player, do not worry. You don't have to know about video games in order to enjoy the book. And if you do enjoy video games, you will enjoy it in a different way on another level. But it's a book that's all about love, betrayal, hope, loss, and friendship, most crucially. And actually, the fabulous Alex, who is the owner of Bert's Books in Swindon, where I was today, was telling me that it's a book that is particularly brilliant, partly because it's a love story, but a love story between two friends, which is a completely platonic friendship and love. And it's an absolutely fantastic and, I believe, positive story. I haven't read it yet, and I'm absolutely dying to read it because of so many people recommending it to me, and that's Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. And if you look it up, it has a really gorgeous cover. It's in hardback, it's all silvery and irresistible. So that's a great one. Then there's also another book that was thoroughly recommended to me, thanks to Sarah Quinn recommending it on Twitter. Babel, or The Necessity of Violence, which is set in Oxford in 1836, the city of dreaming spires, the centre of all knowledge and progress in the world. And at its centre is Babel, the Royal Institute of Translation, the tower from which all the power of the empire flows. So it's a kind of reimagined Oxford, I believe. Haven't read this one. This has been deeply recommended to me by anyone I've spoken to and was brought to my attention on Twitter. Everyone's saying it's absolutely fantastic. And it's a kind of fantastical Oxford in the same way, perhaps, that Philip Pullman writes a fantastical Oxford. So you'll recognise Oxford, but it's reimagined in a new way. It's been described as an incendiary new novel from the award-winning author R.F. Kuang about the power of language, the violence of colonialism, and the sacrifices of resistance. So that is Babel. Babel. I think we say Babel, don't we? So that looks absolutely brilliant. Dying to read that as well. And then another one, which I haven't read and that's been hugely recommended to me. And in fact, I had the joy of sitting for 20 minutes in Bert's Books in Swindon this afternoon. And I read the first few pages of Simon and the Egg by Bobby Palmer. Sorry, it's not Simon and the Egg, Isaac and the Egg. Get that right. Just going to double check that. Don't want to give you the wrong information there. It is Isaac and the Egg, I'm sure. Which I started reading. Yes, it is Isaac and the Egg, which is a beautiful, gorgeous book, deeply recommended by several people that I've met in the last few days, which is a book about grief, loss, sadness, and nurturing, and I believe slowly coming back to life. So I think that's another fantastic book all about the power, well, not about the power of bibliotherapy, but it is a book that resonates with the power of bibliotherapy. So that's Simon and the Egg. So just to very quickly recap, before I do, last one I must recommend is Marple, which is a collection of short stories all about the fantastic character of Miss Marple, but written by 12 modern authors, including Lucy Foley, Val McDermid, Alyssa Cole, Natalie Haynes, Ruth Ware, Naomi Alderman, Jean Kwok, Dreda Say Mitchell, Ellie Griffiths, Karen McManus, Kate Moss, and Lee Bardugo. So this is a really great collection of short stories, which I can thoroughly recommend. Oh, look, there's all the authors on the back, which is a really fun, interesting, different collection of short stories all about Miss Marple. So each of these modern day authors has given a bit of a new slant, a new angle, a new imagining of Miss Marple's character, and given her new stories to solve, new crimes to solve. So that's another great one. So yeah, recapping, Patrick Gale, Mother's Boy, fantastic read, very highly recommended. Stone Blind by Natalie Haynes, 12 Months and a Day by Louisa Young, The Bewitching by Jill Dawson, Young Mungo by Douglas Stewart, Seven Moons of Marley Almeida by Shihan Karunatalika, A Heart That Works by Rob Delaney, and Mrs. Death by Selena Godin. And last but not least, oh, hang on, I didn't mention Kit Duvall's Without Warning and Only Sometimes, the memoir, and probably the one that I've recommended the most in the last couple of weeks, or even the last month, is Still Life by Sarah Winman, because it really is a feel-good novel. So all of those other books that I've been mentioning, I adore and think are brilliant. And oh, didn't have that one in that stack. And Still Life, of course, is the one which is absolutely fantastic. Bibliotherapy. So there we go. Look at that lovely collection. And oh, Marple as well. And finally, Fiction Prescriptions, which is a lovely, beautiful gift box full of exactly that, fiction prescriptions, which is where you can find recommendations, bibliotherapy recommendations for all situations in life. On the back it says, facing life's big experiences, feeling more emotional, whether you're navigating a sexual awakening, divorce, or aging, simply select the appropriate card for fiction prescriptions that will comfort and inspire. So there you go. That is a fantastic Christmas present. Also, don't forget that you can book a bibliotherapy session with me. If you would like a bibliotherapy session, which would be one-to-one, would take place on Zoom, or if you'd like to buy one for a loved one as a fantastic Christmas present, what it entails is you have a session with me that lasts about 50 minutes. We talk all about what you love to read, what you don't love to read, what's going on in your life, any preoccupations you might have currently, and then I match up the perfect books for you to read with you at this time in your life. So I recommend to you 6 books with the reasons for why I'm prescribing them. So if you would like a bibliotherapy session, or if you'd like to buy one for a friend or loved one, I can then send you a voucher by email and a questionnaire to fill in, and then we set up a session. So think about that as a lovely option for the end of the year or the beginning of next year. So thank you so much for joining me tonight. I would still love to know which are your favourite books of the year. Joe Quantrill, thank you for telling me that you love Still Life as well. I've had a lot of people telling me that they love it, which is fantastic. And thank you, Mary, saying I'm off to the library tomorrow. Excellent idea. Let's all make the most of our public libraries. Very important. So yeah, do send me messages if you'd like to tell me about your favourite books of the year. And thanks so much for coming. I will see you in January when I'm going to be doing a special session, hopefully with Damien, all about how to sort out your library, how to sort out your bookshelves, and how to declutter your books and how to make the most of them. Thank you, Madden Van Corvery. Sorry if I'm messing up your name there, for saying you love Kit Duvall's book. Isn't it fantastic? I absolutely love it too. It really made me laugh, and it's just such a different take on that period of time, which I didn't know about at all until I read it. And thank you everyone for coming. Great to see you all. I will see you next year, if not before. Oh, and thank you for loving my dress too. Good night. See you soon. Have a lovely Christmas.